Hello, I'm Jess Rivera with your latest news break in Utah. A climber in the Little Cottonwood Canyon area was rescued from certain death after a rock the size of a refrigerator rolled onto him. The climber was with another climber who had the same thing happen to him, but luckily he was able to get out from under it. In Houston, Texas, a video of a tiger on the loose can be seen all over the internet. A sheriff can be heard yelling at the tiger's owner after coming face to face with the large animal. Texas is known for being one of the most lenient states to own exotic animals. And off the coast of California, 2 college students were rescued after they could not make it back to shore in their makeshift boat, which was made out of buckets, duct tape, and kiddie pools. And that's your latest news break. Now to Water Cooler with David Brody, followed by Outside the Beltway with John Fredericks.
Rocket fire over Israel and Jerusalem as Palestinian terrorists and Jewish defense forces engage in what has become a very scary and bloody battle in the Middle East. Welcome, everybody, to the Water Cooler. I'm David Brody. It's Tuesday, May 11th, 2021. All eyes on Jerusalem. Dozens dead, hundreds injured after the Palestinian terrorist group Hamas fired rockets into Jerusalem. That's the first time they've done that since the 2014 war, and that takes this conflict to a whole other level. In addition, there have been major clashes at the Temple Mount, the sacred religious space to both Jews and Muslims in Jerusalem. And all of this coming as Israel celebrated Jerusalem Day, which of course commemorates the reunification of Eastern Jerusalem with Western Jerusalem by Israel during the Six-Day War back in '67. More in a moment. Also today, the FDA has authorized the use of the Pfizer COVID vaccine for 12 to 15-year-olds in the U.S. We're going to talk to one of the leading doctors in the country about this important new development. By the way, also today, another heated exchange between Senator Rand Paul and Dr. Fauci on Capitol Hill. This time, it was about where the Wuhan lab and how the virus came to be, or where the virus originated. Did it come from the Wuhan lab, and how did that happen? Trust me, you don't want to miss it. Also on the show today, the vote is in. We have a winner in the Virginia gubernatorial race on the Republican side. Glenn Youngkin pulls it out. Will he be the next governor of Virginia? He will be with us here on the show today to discuss. But first, let's begin in Jerusalem, where the air is filled with rockets and tension. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says this: terrorist organizations in Gaza have crossed a red line and attacked us with missiles in the outskirts of Jerusalem. Whoever attacks us will pay a heavy price, warning that the fight could, quote, continue for some time. So let's head to Jerusalem now, where it is in the evening there. Joining us, our good friend Joel Rosenberg, editor-in-chief of All Israel News. Joel, hey, take us through what's happening. Give us the latest there.
Well, David, it's been a very painful 24 hours. We're just past the 24-hour mark. More than 650 rockets have been fired at Israel, including, as you say, 7 were fired towards Jerusalem. I moved here with my family here in 2014. We actually arrived in the midst of that rocket war, where more than 4,200 rockets were fired in a 1-month period. But we've got 650 in one day, and 7 at Israel, at Jerusalem. I was out in my backyard chatting with some friends when we heard the sirens go off. And it's so rare to hear an air raid siren go off in Jerusalem. We didn't actually believe it. And then we heard a boom and felt the shaking of a rocket hitting and destroying a house not far from us. So it's there's more than 1 million people on both sides that live on the Gaza border, and they're living in bomb shelters. They're not sleeping much, but they're living with tremendous fear and anxiety. Especially, imagine the little children living in a bomb shelter, no ability to leave.
Joel, what's the what started all of this? I mean, we know about Hamas and the rockets coming towards Jerusalem, but there was they were celebrating Jerusalem Day in Israel. You had Ramadan. There were certain things that were happening. Well, where's the oxygen here? How did this spiral?
Sure. Well, tactically, what happened was Hamas and other terrorist organizations decided to encourage young people to stockpile rocks and stones and pieces of concrete in the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount, and then start throwing those at Jewish worshipers down on the Western Wall plaza. That's what tactically set this thing off, because and then, of course, Israeli forces had to move into the Temple Mount to stop this barrage, this violation of religious freedom. And it's a very dangerous thing to have rocks raining down on your head, right? And of course, this was designed to pull Israeli forces in and then create a moment, right, where you have tear gas and you have all this stuff going on, so that on television, the world could say, or the Islamic world, the radical Islamist world, could begin to say, Israel is encroaching on our religious freedom and they are desecrating our holy sites. So that's tactically what happened. It's not what you'll hear in the mainstream media, because the mainstream media acts as though suddenly one day Israel decided to be mean to Palestinians and then started bombing Gaza. The big picture, as you say, and you're right, you had a convergence of a couple of things. First, the end of Ramadan. That's 30 days of not eating a single piece of food or having anything, even a glass of water, all day long until the sun goes down. And Muslims are required to do this by Islamic law. And it creates tension, right? It can create piety, but it can create enormous amounts of fatigue and anger and frustration. Yeah. That combined literally with Jerusalem Day, which Palestinian Arabs hate, because for them it's the loss of Jerusalem. It's not the reunification. They call it al-Nakba, the catastrophe, the disaster. And so you had a couple of factors like this, and then Hamas is also upset with the Palestinian leadership in the West Bank, because there was supposed to be an election. Mm-hmm. The Palestinian leadership in the West Bank decided that Hamas was going to win, so they called it off. And Hamas has decided to create a moment where every Palestinian knows that they're in charge and they're the ones that are tough and the other guys are weak. And it's a bad convergence, a perfect storm of trouble.
Let me ask you one last question on this, and I want to move to another quick topic.
Sure.
So where is this going exactly? Netanyahu says they crossed a red line here. This is Jerusalem they're attacking. Is this going to get worse before it gets better? What's your sense?
It's really hard to say. I've been through enough cycles of this that I can see it shutting down in the next 24 to 48 hours. Mm-hmm. But this thing could explode. I mean, when you start shooting people and killing people on both sides, this thing could just take off and become a regional war.
Right. Okay. Gotcha. Listen, Joel, while I have you here, I've got to ask you about this headline in the Times of Israel. It was fascinating to look at this. Ron Dermer suggests Israel should prioritize support of evangelicals over Jews. At least that's of course, the former Israeli ambassador. Talk to us about this. This is very, very interesting what he's saying here.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, the Times of Israel, which I love as a publication, but the headline is terrible. Because all Israel News, the site I lead, got it more accurate. Ron Dermer was the U.S. Israeli ambassador to the U.S. for 7 years. Yeah. Netanyahu's closest, most trusted advisor. And I've known Dermer for more than 20 years. What Dermer was saying, and he said it explicitly in this interview, he said, it's not that we need to do less outreach and working with American Jews of all religious denominations and political persuasions. No, he says, but we need to do more with evangelicals. And Dermer is an Orthodox Jew, was being interviewed by an Orthodox Jew to an Orthodox Jewish audience. So it sounded strange to their ears, and they're like, what are you talking about? He said, look at it, 25% roughly of Americans are evangelical Christians. Their numbers are huge. Their passion for Israel is huge. Israel, for most evangelicals, is either the number one issue or two or three. For some American Jews, they don't care at all about Israel. He said, so we need to do more outreach to evangelicals because they are our strategic allies. They are why America is pro-Israel in Washington. the American Jewish community is very small. The evangelical community, the pro-Israel community, is the backbone, he said, of the relationship. And we need to nurture it, encourage it, and develop it. And I totally agree with him, but it was a fascinating interview.
Well, Joel Rosenberg, really appreciate your time here, and thanks for giving us that perspective. It's always good to see you. Stay safe over there, Editor-in-Chief of All Israel News in Jerusalem tonight. Appreciate it, Joel. But by the way, I should point out a little personal note, if you will. Grew up Jewish. Gave my life to Jesus in 1988. We call him Yeshua, if you will. It's the Jewish name for Jesus. And so, look, I grew up as a Reformed Jew. I grew up in a liberal Jewish household. American Jews, American liberal Jews. My family, folks. That's how I grew up. And then being in kind of the evangelical Christianity circles, Joel's absolutely right. Ron Dermer's absolutely right. Evangelicals are the #1 supporters of the state of Israel. It's not even a question. And it's not even about the state of Israel. It's about Jews overall around the country and around the world. So don't buy this idea that evangelicals have this tension with Jews. Now, look, the Reformed Jewish community and some in the conservative Jewish community possibly may have that tension. But when it comes to Orthodox Jews, they love evangelical Christians. Why? Because from a Zionist perspective, from a situation where they believe in the inerrant Word of God, whether it be Old Testament or New Testament, there is simpatico agreement on Judea and Samaria and all of the important land that was given to the Jewish people by God. It's in the Bible. Look, I don't want to get into all of that. But the bottom line is this. That is why evangelical Christians support the Jewish people in spades, for sure. Anyhow, a little perspective from me from a personal standpoint. All right, when we come back, Glenn Youngkin will be here. He's the Republican nominee for governor in Virginia. Can he beat Terry McAuliffe? We'll talk about it when we come back.